My cat Freddie loves to be brushed and cuddled. But stirring up his cat allergens meant sneezing and itchy eyes. Then I found Purina One Live Clear. It's cat food that reduced the major allergen and my suffering in as little as 21 days. Now, we feel closer than ever. If you have issues with cat allergens, you really need to try Purina One Live Clear.
Try new Purina One Live Clear today. Purina One, a difference from day one.
How does PwC take your company to the leading edge? They bring the sharpest minds in tech to your team, so you can bring the ideas that will transform your business. They're passionate about your industry, so you can walk into any room with every advantage. And they're with you every step of the way, so you can know you're headed in the right direction. PwC builds for what's next, so you can get there now. Get started at pwc.com/us/leading edge.
This is The Other Side of Midnight with Frank Morano.
They're running a strange program, y'all.
Now, here's Frank Morano.
1, 2, 3, take us space! Woo!
It's about this wonderful world that we see right out there and appreciating it. This is all for the benefit of Earth.
The possibility that 2024 YR4 could impact the Earth in 2032 is really remote. We know that this asteroid is going to come close to the Earth in 2032 to within 1.5 times the distance to the Moon. The probability of impact is only 0.3%. We're going to keep updating this impact probability as we collect additional tracking data, and the updated results are always going to be available on the NASA public web pages.
So we already knew that as Starliner was heading to the space station, it lost some of its thrusters. We also knew that NASA astronaut Butch Wilmore had to take manual control of Starliner. But their options were much more limited than we probably knew on the ground.
Thank you, Chairman Cruz, Ranking Member Cantwell, distinguished members of the committee. I'm honored and very grateful to be here before you today as President Donald Trump's nominee to lead the National Aeronautic and Space Administration. I have lived the American dream, and I owe this nation a great debt. I would happily serve President Trump in any capacity, but to work alongside the people that have expanded the boundaries of exploration and brought humanity closer to the stars would be the privilege of a lifetime.
Those are a few of the subjects you are going to hear about for the next hour as Dr. Sky and I take you on a radio journey whose only limits are that of the imagination, because for the next hour, you're going to embark on some cosmic conversations.
The Other Side of Midnight presents... From the spiral to the elliptical to the lenticular to the irregular to the quasars, galaxies. Where are we in the cosmic evolutionary picture? Always remember to keep your eyes to the skies. The following conversations are cosmic conversations with Steve Cates, a.k.a. Dr. Sky.
Oh, yes. If you are new to the show, you are in for a treat, because the subjects that we're going to get into for the next hour, some are silly, some are serious, all are interesting. And we have the guy with the best voice in all of radio in order to take us through them. Dr. Sky, Steve Cates, a veteran broadcaster, educator, space expert, and edutainer, and these days, also a world-renowned radio talk show host. Steve, it's great to talk with you.
Well, Frank, good morning. Good to be with you on Cosmic Conversations. How time goes so quick, and certainly looking forward to journeying out to the stars and beyond. Thank you for having me.
So let's begin with this all-female Blue Origin flight. This is something that got a lot of attention, understandably so. Anytime you're going to space, that's going to get some attention. Anytime you're going to space with a bunch of women, that's going to get even more attention. But when they're all famous, boom, that's the trifecta. What exactly happened? Just give us the Reader's Digest version to start on this all-female space flight.
Well, New Shepard does it again. Kudos to Jeff Bezos and his team there. For people who may not know, it's the 11th crewed mission that they've had where individuals have been selected, I gather, in their celebrity status, and others that might have paid to go up to space Again, it's not an orbital flight, in case people are curious about this, and I'm sure they are. The very first time this was done was back May 5th, 1961, when Alan Shepard did what we call the classic suborbital flight. And we saw all the attention that garnered around, way back when. So I find it fascinating, and I'm hearing some ruminations out there. Some people are actually making fun of this, and I think that's not really nice. I mean, all these individuals were selected to go. Many of them, of course, have celebrity status, and being a female crew, I think that's just awesome to have women, move forward into this. Some describe it as simply just like a amusement park ride. Others describe it as, something serious for females and young ladies out there that want to look up to say, hey, I'd like to do that someday and be an astronaut. So I say congratulations. I mean, we've heard a lot of negatives on this, and I don't know why, but I'm excited for them just the same.
Well, I'm going to ask you about some of those negatives in a minute. By the way, if people have questions this hour for Steve Kates, a.k.a. Dr. Sky, you can absolutely give us a call at 646-720-0635. That's 1-646-720-0635. And if you want to hear more about some of the subjects that we're going to get into, you can check out the Dr. Sky experience on any podcast app. But from your perspective, Steve, as an educator, as a space expert, how significant is this all-female Blue Origin flight in the broader history of human space flight? Is it pretty significant, not very significant, something in between? What do you think?
I think it is significant because let's go back a little off subject, but maybe it'll focus back here and be really easy for everybody to, resolve and talk about it. We find out that, of course, an astronomer, Vera Rubin, was denied many, many years ago in the 1940s and 50s her ascent to get a PhD. And again, the misogyny that existed, and I'm sure this does go on, in all different walks of life, sadly. Nobody should be discriminated against if they're smart and they want to attain an education level. So Vera Rubin in the astronomical world, she obviously pursued her dreams, but we haven't seen a flight like this. Remember, the first female to ever go up into space was back on June 16th, 1963, a Russian cosmonaut, female, of course, Valentina Tereshkova. She surprised the world because in that particular time, there was a lot of pressure not to send female. So in simple English, I think it's a great milestone for females. And again, not to be repetitive, but I think to stay on measure, I think if there were a lot of young ladies, young women out there, or even, of course, women of all ages, I think this is a great accomplishment for women. Although this is not, and it hasn't been, this is something I want to clarify. None of these missions that have gone up with Blue Origin, these crewed missions, this one being the 11th, as I mentioned, were any scientific missions. In other words, participants were not sitting there with spectroscopes or, monitoring equipment. They were there literally to give their description of what is the beauty and the awe of going up above that line, which some people may not have heard. It's called the Kármán line, some 62 miles. And there you go. You punch through that, and the world would categorize you or classify you as an astronaut. I think it's a significant milestone today.
So the critics have called this flight a publicity stunt. Others, like Gayle King, who was on the flight, argue that it's deeply inspirational. Honestly, I can understand both perspectives. What's your take on that tension between publicity stunt and deeply inspirational?
Well, again, look at the individuals that have gone up there. Katy Perry, and we look at Gayle King, we look at some other people that maybe not have the notoriety that they do from, let's say, the media or in the music industry. But I think, I've been listening to this in various forms, and you've been watching, and people have been watching television news. And I would say maybe 7 out of 10 of these different radio and television reports are coming out and say, that's just another amusement park for, or amusement ride, rather, for rich individuals. And I don't know why they're picking on the women. I mean, they did it. It's something that I think they now classify themselves as astronauts, and why not? It's a technology accomplishment for Jeff Bezos. Again, the 11th time that they've done this. And who knows, Frank, maybe you and I one day, if we set up one of those, little GoFundMe pages, maybe we'd have the same experience. And then we would bring a focused effort on talking about the science, just like William Shatner. He went up and they weren't expecting him to go warp drive, so he enjoyed it, and they wanted to know the philosophic meaning of that. So I think it was a great experience for them.
As you mentioned, the flight was suborbital and it lasted under 11 minutes. For listeners who may not understand, explain what that means in terms of the actual experience that these passengers had. Let's say you and I do the GoFundMe route one day, and you and I are able to get seats on one of these Blue Origin flights in the future. What are we actually in store for?
Well, first we have to go through a series of serious medical tests. Obviously, they're not going to send us up for any minor or, obviously any kind of medical issue. But there we are, Frank. You and I and other people are strapped into their chairs. You're lying on your back. And you're not in a spacesuit. You're in a controlled environment. And I haven't been on one, obviously, but just describing the geometry in there, there's many spacious windows so people can actually look out. So the experience, I gather, would go like this. I'm doing an injustice to it because I haven't been there. But again, from what other people have described, you feel a G-force, maybe 3 or 4 Gs, pressing you down into the couch or the chair. And then as you ascend, you maybe cannot hear too much up there because you're seeing all that rocket propulsion is below you. And when you reach that altitude or that mark in the sky, that Kármán line, you're actually going to become weightless for a time, unstrap, and you float around for a few moments. And remember, the booster rocket that pushed you up into space, that also has another story unto its own. It actually comes back in soft land so it can be reused. And then what you experience, you get back into your chair. Again, this is 10 minutes going fast here on radio. Then you're strapped back into your chair, and obviously you feel, I'm sure, some of that descent energy as that rocket, the capsule is slowly moving through the upper regions of space. And then safely you're returned to Earth via a series of significant parachutes and a relatively soft landing. So it goes real quick. And I imagine per person, if you and I were to pay for it, I've heard stories of about upwards of about $300,000 per chair. So maybe we better start that GoFundMe.
Yeah, exactly. But last question on this.
Yeah, sure.
Lauren Sanchez, who is, I believe, either the fiance or the wife of Jeff Bezos, she mentioned wanting critics to see the thousands of employees behind the mission. Can you speak to the real engineering and logistical achievements involved in a successful launch like this?
Sure. It's like going to the Oscars. I mean, somebody's on stage congratulating, or the Academy is congratulating one individual, but all through that, if you can imagine the audience, these are like the people that are all behind in a reverse role. You're looking back at the audience. You have a series of dedicated engineers, rocket scientists, the true rocket scientists, and even the person, how do I say this, that puts the propellant into the rocket, all serious people to a mission. And about Lauren Sanchez, maybe people don't know this also. She's a very well-trained helicopter pilot. She has a company, I believe it's in California, in which she does this very special thing with videography. They can actually shoot some 4K, 8K video. And I've seen some of this. I don't know if you have, but her company, she's an accomplished helicopter pilot, and right on. I mean, that's great. And I think she's also an inspiration for a lot of young women. And she came from the broadcast world. And even where I'm sitting right now in Phoenix, Arizona, I understand she had a small stint here at one of the local television stations, move over to L.A. But again, her description of talking about everybody to make it possible, because it's really a great organization. And these are a lot of younger people, too. I mean, if we don't look at the old rocket scientists maybe this way, that these are young people in college, maybe aged individuals, and maybe some in their 30s and 40s that are really the true definition of the next generation of space scientists. So kudos to them.
Absolutely. All right. If you have questions, 646-720-0635. That's 1-646-720-0635. Joan is in Manhattan. Hi there, Joan.
Hi, Frank. Hi, Steve. I have a question. I was listening to an astronomer a few months ago, Professor Jim Bell, who was talking about experiments that were done on the moon. And he mentioned the name of one of the astronauts who did an experiment on gravity, and he dropped a feather and a hammer from a height on the moon, and sure enough, they both hit the ground at exactly the same time. So the feather, since there is no air on the moon, the feather doesn't have any air resistance. Normally on the Earth, a feather kind of floats down slowly. But on the moon, no, it hit the ground exactly the same second as the hammer. But when he mentioned that there's no air on the moon, it reminded me that there's no air on the moon. And I remember reading that without air, there is no sound. Sound needs air. There's no sound in a vacuum. Does that mean there's no sound on the moon? If I'm talking to you 10 inches away, you will see my lips move, but you won't hear a thing?
You're absolutely right, John, and that's exactly the situation. The only way you and I would communicate is the obvious way, through our helmets and our microphones coming back in your earphones back on the moon. But that's interesting. Alan Shepard did this, and also and other Apollo astronauts did this. But just to make the story complete, we find out that when this particular thing happened, or this event, Alan Shepard, unbeknownst that is to the NASA crew, he actually, put some contraband in his spacesuit, and he put a couple of golf balls up there. So he has claimed to having an amazing shot. He used some kind of a device that turned itself into a driver, and he actually fired a couple of golf balls off the surface of the moon.
That's wild.
And that is incredible, Joan, because when he did that, those golf balls, remember, you're in 1/6 gravity. I can't say for sure that they went into orbit, but you're right. And in one of the movies, I think it was the Alien movie, one of the great one-liners, I guess, is in that movie is in space. Joan,
no one can hear you scream.
Hear you scream. There you go. Great question and observation there. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Joan. All right, 646-720-0635. This is The Other Side of Midnight, which every 2 weeks becomes Cosmic Conversations. We'll continue straight ahead.
The Other Side of Midnight with Frank Morano. It's The Other Side of Midnight with Frank Morano.
This is The Other Side of Midnight, Cosmic Conversations edition. My guest is, as he is each hour, this hour, every 2 weeks, is Steve Kates, or as we lovingly refer to him, Dr. Sky. Not only is he an expert in aviation, astronomy, space, anything that involves looking up, he also is a very popular, becoming increasingly more popular by the week, radio talk show host who you can listen to on WABC early Saturday mornings. And if you're listening on one of our stations around the country, you can absolutely tune in online at WABCradio.com. That's WABCradio.com. Steve, how are you enjoying doing this show? I know you're no stranger to the world of broadcasting, but this sort of a format is a little bit different from what you've been doing, at least recently. How do you like it?
I love it, Frank, and it takes a little while. Always humble here. I have a lot to learn, but I'm going to bring back some of those resources if you give me the confidence, and many of the listeners out there. So we have some great guests. I mean, looking forward here, we're looking to talk, sadly, about this 2025 Hudson River helicopter crash that just happened. And we're going to go a little different on this. I've had a relationship with a gentleman, friendly it is, with a gentleman named Artemis Pyle from Leonard Skinner. And many people may wonder, what the heck is that all about? Because back in 1977, he was witness to and actually saved a number of people in a horrific airplane crash where they lost a number of the band members. So that's going to be an interesting conversation, not only for people who love music, particularly this band, but Artemis's story about how he saved. He actually did a documentary on this. And this is an exciting time, and plus some other guests. But I'm enjoying it, Frank, and I'm really grateful to be with you and all the listeners out there on these subjects.
Well, that's great. Now, since you mentioned the helicopter crash, that's exactly what I was going to ask you about next. Can you walk us through what we know so far about the moment that helicopter began to break apart in New York?
Well, basically, Frank, first of all, our hearts go out to the loss of life.
Absolutely.
I mean, that's the obvious statement here. But the little I know about this, I'm not a helicopter pilot. I've done as much research as I can here. And I think we really ought to hold back, not you and I, I'm saying, but the whole world as far as until we really know. There's no black box on board this particular helicopter. And just to describe this particular helicopter, I've flown in a helicopter similar to this a few times with my involvement with the law enforcement world. We had a sheriff's helicopter like this, but it was a 4-bladed version. The one in this tragic accident is a Bell 206 Long Ranger 4 L-4. And this is a manufactured helicopter that I believe up in Canada is the primary manufacturing facility for this. But to get right on what happened, obviously some 18 minutes into the flight, taking off from, of course, the southern part of Manhattan, going up the Hudson River, making a U-turn basically near the George Washington Bridge. And then this particular pilot, as we believe from the radio transmissions, was looking to go and refuel again, not of an emergency situation. But what might have happened here, Frank, and again, I don't want to go overboard on this because I do not know, and I don't want to sound like I have any of these details accurate, but speculation from the science on this. This is what could have happened, according to many in the world of avionics and aircraft, that there probably was on this two-bladed helicopter, the top of the rotor, there's a very interesting piece of that rotor. It's called the main rotor retaining nut. Now, I don't know if you've talked about this before, but in the aviation world, they simply called it the Jesus nut. Now, not to be funny, it's that if something happens with the nut coming loose, you would simply use the phrase and pray to Jesus because that helicopter is then more than likely going to come down. Now, in a situation where a helicopter will come down, let's say the engine is misfiring or shuts down, many aviators know this, and I'm sure there's many listening. It's like as if you put the engine in neutral, and I've been in a military helicopter when they did this, they call it auto rotation. So the helicopter basically at a certain altitude, the rotor will be spinning, and it can successfully come down even if the engine's not powered. But in this particular case, just to get right to it, it's possible that that nut was primary cause of what happened to the two-bladed rotor, that when it started to separate, it went down on an angle and literally sheared off the tail rotor section of that helicopter. And then, as you can see in those horrific videos, there looks like three components coming down into the river. What were they? The two-bladed rotor, which separated, possibly, and I don't know this for sure, the tail rotor section, which gives you nothing but a fuselage, which sadly I believe came down upside down. And the rest, of course, is a tragic part of history with that helicopter. But we pray for the souls on that. I mean, there's not much anybody can do if that is the cause, and I'm not saying it is. That's what a lot of aviation people are leaning to. But I don't know if you were ever talking about this part of the main rotor retaining nut, otherwise known as the Jesus nut.
I was actually saving it for you, Steve. I had it on my list for our conversation all week. But you mentioned that that's one of the operating theories, that the Jesus nut might have been at fault here. How unusual is it for a helicopter, especially one like this, to literally come apart midair?
Well, it's not all that common. I mean, there's some other things that we can talk about in the New York area that, and I remember this when I lived there, and maybe you, of course, remember this yourself. Let's go back to the date of May 16, 1977. Why is that important? In days in the past, there was helicopter service from a company called New York Airways, and they would land helicopters, these Boeing Vertol 107s, and in this particular case, a Sikorsky S-61L, a much larger helicopter. And here's what happened. Apparently, while taking off from the rooftop of the Pan Am building at the time, the aircraft had one of its landing gears break. The main rotor literally slammed down. This is horrific, and I'll keep it, as simple as I can explain it without the gory details. The spinning of this rotor killed 4 passengers waiting to board the helicopter, including a movie director known as Michael Finley. And then a 5th individual was killed. Parts of that broken blade fell down into the streets, killing a pedestrian and injuring others. And that stopped the entire, helicopter service that they were having. But again, we don't know. So those rotors, when I got in a helicopter, I don't know, have you flown on a number of helicopters?
I think one, when I was very young over Niagara Falls, I think. Okay. I don't know that I've had any as an adult, honestly.
Yeah, we have friends that have them. I mean, it's way out of my price category. But the point is, when we go there, and occasionally they'll want to fly, and they'll say, you want to go up? And I'm like, okay, I've done it. But I always kind of have my head, my whole body, I duck down, even though I think that rotor, it seems like it's above my head close. It's actually spinning up there at a great velocity in, rotations per minute. But the point is, on this particular one, Frank, I mean, it's not, to answer your question, it's not all that common that you have helicopter blades and rotor blades come off the top of the helicopter. So it's all about the maintenance on these. And again, I could not point my finger toward what happened there. From what I'm reading, apparently the helicopter had a, quote, clean bill of health. I don't know how recent the entire, as they call it in the aviation world, an A&P, aircraft and, maintenance type of schedule. But it is just horrible. So helicopter rotors do not normally come off the top of helicopters. And in this case, that's one of the leading contenders from aviation people that I've talked to as the cause.
Are people pretty much decided that pilot error was not likely a factor here?
I believe that's correct, Frank. And again, I don't want to go too deep into it for things I really don't know. But Again, I'm just reading this just like everybody else. And NTSB obviously will be doing an investigation, and other, law enforcement agencies all surrounding the New York area. But it's so sad that this happens, because this is generally, and I don't want people out there to think that this is a horrible helicopter. It has a generally very good track record. The more advanced version of this particular helicopter was known as the Bell 407. I've flown in one of those, as I mentioned, with the Sheriff's Department. It had a 4-blade rotor system on top. And you look at this, look at the military Black Hawk helicopter that was in the January event. Not necessarily did that have the causation for the crash wasn't necessarily a rotor blade. It was more of a pilot error there. But generally, I would say the helicopters have had a relatively decent track record over time. And that very same helicopter, not one that those poor people perished in, but that same design helicopter, a 206B3, actually had a world record. It flew around the world. And it departed, I believe, and I'm reading this right now, from Hearst, Texas on June the 24th and returned 24 days, 4 hours, and 36 minutes later. And obviously it put a giant 91-gallon fuel tank on board. I don't know how they did that. I'd want to ask those guys and gals how they flew over the ocean when you can't fly over the ocean without refueling many times.
Mm-hmm.
So they say that flew around the world. So generally safe. And then we knew very quickly, with some of the air shows we've gone to, Red Bull had a very interesting helicopter. It had a German MBB helicopter, which is a pretty advanced helicopter. They use it a lot for medevac flights. We knew the pilot of that. And Frank, this is off the charts. They would actually have him fly that helicopter to do loop-de-loops over the air show. So you would see that helicopter do a complete vertical, go up on its back upside down.
Wow.
And when I asked that pilot, I would never ask for the ride, of course, but I asked him, well, how does that helicopter do it? And he said what they did, they structurally improved that helicopter way beyond what a regular helicopter would be. But just seeing that was just like bizarre, don't you think? It's a helicopter doing loop-de-loops. That's amazing.
No question about it. Last question about this. Whenever there's any sort of mishap involving a helicopter, a tour helicopter, or even an airplane or something, there's always some politician in Manhattan that says they should not allow non-essential helicopter travel over Manhattan, that it's too dangerous and that it's an unnecessary risk. What do you think of that? Is it time to ban commercial helicopter travel for tourists over places like Manhattan?
Well, I think we need to take a big pause here. And I think, some of the politicians, without naming them, I've heard this. And I think maybe they have a point that I think I would agree with. I think for now, let's just cool our engines, literally, and just look at the cause of this. And just like every part of aviation right now, I mean, look at the professionalism of most of these, I would say 99.9% of anything is good, and we have certain things that are not good. But in this case, no. I don't think they should stop forever these type of helicopter flights. I think if people want to do this and you sign a waiver that you say, okay, I understand the risks, but there again, they shouldn't just whole kill an industry. I tend not to like the word ban. I think what we need to do is just kind of wait for a while, see what the results are here, see how we can improve this. But one of the big things, Frank, I think you would agree also, is that all air traffic in this country needs to have better governance as far as how they're flying with the people who are in control of the air traffic control system. And I think that's an understatement, don't you think?
I do indeed. All right. If people have questions, they can call us 646-720-0635. That's 1-646-720-0635. All right. I think we talked about this 2 weeks ago, actually. There were reports that this asteroid was a city killer asteroid was in danger of potentially hitting the Earth. Now it may smash into the moon in 2032. Let's start with the basics. What can you tell us about asteroid 2024 YR4? How and when was it discovered?
Well, its discovery, Frank, obviously going back into the latter part of 2024, we find out that the astronomers who did not have, and they admitted this, it was known, a complete analysis of its orbit. And we know now that it takes basically 3 celestial observations, and I'm making this simple, to help astronomers calculate an orbit, celestial dynamics, the whole thing, celestial mechanics. So this asteroid, the original, prophecy was that it's going to hit the Earth possibly with a small percentage. Then that percentage went up in 2030 for 2032. But then through deep analysis, and I think this is how it happened with the James Webb Telescope, getting a further fix on this. And by the way, this is probably one of the most interesting objects that James Webb has ever been, tasked to spy on, because it's usually, as an infrared telescope, meant to go out and look at the edges of the universe. So now the astronomers are saying that, our orbital calculations for it hitting the Earth, we now are told, is not going to happen, in 2032. But, they say, now, due to its orbit, it has a 3.8% chance. Think about that. 3.8%, do the math from 100. So then it has the opposite percentage of not hitting the Earth. Remember, it's a 200-foot in diameter. We're not sure if it's nickel iron. If it is, that's the worst kind for any impactor because it's not going to disintegrate or melt as it comes through the atmosphere. If it's an assemblage of a stony type of asteroid, meaning like a rubble pile, held together loosely, as if you took a snowball that was melting and put a bunch of rocks in it, it doesn't have the frozen effect. And in this case, I'm saying even like that of nickel iron, obviously, metal is metal. So the potential of it hitting the moon in 2032 is there. But if it were to happen, Frank, this would be an amazing celestial event because people on Earth, if it were to hit the illuminated side of the Earth, I would say get out your popcorn, barbecues, if it's going to happen at night. It would probably be a bigger gathering than a Woodstock for people who want to watch it. But here's the thing. We look at the moon, and you all see this full moon, and you see at the bottom it has this one big bright crater with all these rays or lines coming out of it. That's exactly what happened, which formed a crater called Tycho. An asteroid body, much larger than this, created a 60-mile in diameter impactor, maybe 1 million or 2 million years ago. But this little thing, it could still, if it were to hit the moon on the visible side, it would be something to be seen, as you would see material either spraying out of that or the edge of the moon, depending where it hit. But let's keep our fingers crossed and hope in this case that they're totally wrong, that it's not going to hit the Earth or the moon.
The asteroid itself has a pretty unusual hockey puck-like shape. Why is that so rare? And what could that tell us, if anything, about its origin or its composition or really anything at all?
Well, the word amorphous is the word we use here in astronomy for any asteroid. What is that? It's an irregular. It's not a perfectly round sphere like a billiard ball. We find this particular shape, and it's not even guaranteed. I mean, that's what they think at this point. It resembles that hockey, puck shape. But the thing is, it's kind of unusual. If you would ever see a perfectly spherical asteroid, I would be really concerned. Because the origin of these asteroids, remember, billions of years ago, in school we learned that there's a belt of asteroids between Mars and Jupiter, and it contains probably hundreds of millions of debris or particles. So if you wonder where they all came from, it's a constant event of one smashing into another over the course of time. And guess what? Unlike us on the Earth, if we live 100+ years, blessings to all of us, but in time and space, that goes on for billions of years. So the shape of those objects is irregular. They could be sharp like a tooth. They could be somewhat rounded, but never this perfect sphere. And the problem with that is you have another differential. Now, this gets a little technical, and I'll try to make it quick. If it were a perfect sphere, sunlight on that, if it were turning, has a relative, a frequency that you could calculate its, turning or rotation. But because these asteroids are like, these amorphous things, weird shapes with the sharp edges on them, there's a phenomenon in space called the Yarkovsky effect. And what is that? That's what they call differential rotation due to heating. So in other words, the heating from the sun, because the object is not a perfect sphere, can start to change its rotation as the sunlight pushes or tugs on areas of that irregular shaped object. What's all that mean in simple English? Is that an object like that, if you predicted its path, it probably is not going to follow it with the exactitude that you would expect, because the sunlight's hitting it and maybe changing its deviation, which could be big if it was headed toward the Earth.
I've been very eager to ask you about this story. I don't know if you have any opinion about it. I don't know if you have any thoughts about it, and maybe it'll be a brief conversation, but there was a declassified Cold War era file from the CIA that has gone viral over its coverage of a supposed clash between Soviet soldiers and a UFO, passengers of which, I'm not joking here, reportedly turned the troops to stone before blasting off. Following the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, the CIA acquired a 250-page KGB report recounting the events that transpired after a platoon fired at a flying saucer in Ukraine. What exactly is this declassified CIA document, Steve? Where exactly did it come from? How did the CIA get access to this 250-page KGB report?
Well, I wish I knew. I'm always honest with you and the listeners. But here, on a lighter note, maybe a whole bunch of Soviet, army or wherever they were drinking a lot of vodka, and there came to be this story like one of these great myths, like, we see these giant creatures that roam around in the mountains way out there like Bigfoot. But no, 20 years ago, I probably would have laughed at this and said this is ridiculous. But I find it fascinating. I mean, we don't have evidence. I don't know much more about it than yourself, let's say. But I think it's also interesting, and not to change subject, that we find also in Italy a similar kind of experience where a captured craft, this time they didn't turn people into stone, and it has a lot to do with the Vatican, that there was actually a captured craft, aliens that allegedly were found not dead, but actually captured. But the whole thing to me is just fascinating. That one's a little deep, it's like more of a sci-fi movie. But if that were true, I have no idea how the CIA got that from KGB. But again, Frank, that's why we do these programs, right? To keep our minds open, to keep investigating. And maybe someday we'll get some evidence that shows us a piece of something from another world, or maybe the alleged body. And let's take a look, and why not tell us the truth? Right?
Yeah.
How about that?
Yeah. All right. Let's talk about everybody's favorite company, and that's Boeing. It's been 10 months since NASA astronauts Butch Wilmore and Suni Williams traveled to the International Space Station on board Boeing's, Starliner. And this is an aircraft or a spacecraft that we've seen riddled with issues. As far as we know, at least as far as you know, how unusual is it for NASA to waive its own flight rules in real time during a mission, especially rules that are related to critical safety systems like thrusters, which is apparently what happened here?
Well, they came very close. I mean, the news media is reporting it in some detail, that if it wasn't for Butch and his capabilities to override, it has to do, again, with these helium thrusters on board Starliner. And the whole world was throwing darts at Starliner, and, obviously, Boeing, we've heard this for almost a year about how horrible this craft was, and thank God the astronauts are safe, which we agree on. But it came down to this, as I'm reading this, again, not to talk to any sources at NASA on this or Boeing, but apparently the helium thrusters, as they came very, very close to the ISS, many people may not recognize, and I learn all the time, that docking with the space station is not just a simple piece of cake. These particular spacecraft are normally automated. And when they returned this, the two astronauts, Suni and Butch, when they returned back on Crew Dragon, that was a completely automated return. So they sat in there, the computers are navigating, but getting to come into that the space station, it was supposed to be pretty much an automated thing, but those helium thrusters were firing at different rates. And he, of course, had to take over and manually override that, which is being a pilot, and that's what they're trained for. But the horrible thing, Frank, really quickly, if that didn't work, they might have been blown away. You know, I don't mean the word blow into space because there's no air, but they might have been pushed away from the International Space Station, forcing them, if they had to come back, as an emergency deorbit from orbit. And we know the problems that craft had when it did come back without the two crew members. That might have been a really serious space disaster. But, you know, thank goodness a person like Butch, and I'm sure Suni was also there to assist, they had an ability to manually navigate because your helium thrusters are either not firing properly, or that's probably one of the big source problems on that whole Starliner, the thruster systems.
All right, we're going to continue our cosmic conversations with Dr. Sky in just a moment. This is The Other Side of Midnight. Straight ahead.
The Other Side of Midnight. It's The Other Side of Midnight with Frank Morano.
This is The Other Side of Midnight. We are having some cosmic conversations. My guest is Steve Kates, a.k.a. Dr. Sky. Steve, I have heard, and I think you should take this as a great compliment, that more and more listeners who have been listening to our segments over the last few years, they've said that you've inspired them to go out and purchase a new pair of binoculars. In one or two cases, I've even heard directly from people that said they've gotten a new telescope just to keep up with the celestial objects that you talk about regularly. What can we see in the April skies? What should people keep an eye out for?
Well, again, thank you for those words. And again, our purpose is, of course, you and I as a team, to open everybody's minds on the things we probably don't hear about every day. But here's what our analysis of April as we move now past the midway point. There's a meteor shower that's going to come up the morning hours of the 22nd, and actually the morning of the 21st into the 22nd, called the Lyrids. And it's one of the better meteor showers of the year. If you have a dark location to look at the sky, where would you look? From midnight on, you'll see in the northeast sky with a clear sky, there's a star called Vega, 25 light years away. This is the star that Jodie Foster in the movie Contact is so excited about when she detects so-called alien life from a radio telescope. But meteors come out of that area from a comet called Comet Thatcher. And it's a comet that's, amazing. I mean, it's not something, and I get in trouble on this because people send me emails and say, hey, you told me to look and I saw nothing. And then they tell me they were in the brightest part of the city. And I say, well, obviously weather conditions have a lot to do. And meteor showers are like comets. And somebody described them as, with comets, like with cats, and they compare to comets. And the analysis goes like this. Both comets and cats are very unique. They both have tails, talking about comets. And like a cat, they do exactly what they want to do. But when you get to look at meteors, this meteor shower can be good as long as you have a dark location. But what's interesting, if you're an early morning riser, Venus, as we call her, the goddess of love and beauty, becomes incredibly bright just before sunrise. You can't miss it. By the 27th, I mean, if you did this early this morning and looked out before sunrise, northeast sky, as you look into the heavens, you'll be able to see this most amazing object. It's beautiful. It's something actually more east, to be precise. And then we get a new moon on the 27th. And for those that have a really dark sky, they may already be doing this. You can look out there with like the pair of binoculars that we were talking about, or the small telescope, and see some of the most amazing things. And even people living in city lights, Frank, we have an opportunity to see planets. Like if you look high up into the northwest at sunset now, there's Jupiter. And we just did a program here about a week ago for a group of people in Arizona. And we showed them this in this giant pair of binoculars, and they were amazed to say, wow, that thing's 500 million miles away. And I said, yeah, they were seeing the little moons around it. So it's really fun. And this is something, Frank, I know you know, and this is, we all agree on. It's something for everybody. You can be a young student, you can be a middle-aged person, and we have a following here with a lot of seniors. So it's always to open up our minds about the great things that are in our heavens.
Steve, we had some hearings on the President Trump's appointee to be the new administrator of NASA. What are we? Where are we headed in terms of this likely confirmation for the new NASA administrator? What will this person be in charge of? What do we know about his background?
Well, we know that all these individuals with these particular agencies, for the most part, this one in particular, NASA, is at the pleasure, they serve at the pleasure of the president who would appoint them. And now Senate confirmations are underway. I don't think, as we're on the air live right now, that has been confirmed officially that he's passed all the checks. But here's the individual, in case people are concerned. Jared Isaacman, he's a billionaire, self-made billionaire, started in New Jersey with a little pay system, which I find fascinating. And he's not an engineer, and a lot of people were kind of ripping into him in the Senate and the hearings. That, well, where's your background in engineering and all this? But that's really, I don't think, the focus. I think it's a good person, in my opinion, who'd be a good manager. And he's also a person who's gone to space a number of times. But one of the things interesting, Frank, I don't know if you heard this, but maybe some people did too, or maybe they didn't. He said, and I quote, "I will not be beholden to Musk." So, end quote. So he's obviously looking to organize his, agency, and they have a lot of issues. I mean, their moon mission is really kind of like off focus, I think, or out of focus. They have good plans, but they realize that they can't launch these moon missions with the budget that they have. So who comes into the picture, I'm sure? What is Musk trying to do with SpaceX? He's building, his craft to actually go to the moon and Mars. And then interestingly, Musk said, maybe we should just bypass the moon and just head straight to Mars. But I think he'll be a good administrator. And I just hope that they confirm him, if it hasn't happened already, as we're on the air now.
646-720-0635. Actually, not very much time at all, so we probably won't have time for additional calls. But before I let you go, Steve, Barnard's star may contain 4 new planets. That's a pretty exciting discovery, isn't it?
It sure is. And a great astronomer called E.E. Barnard, he obviously had probably the best eyes. He claimed in the telescope that he could see the craters on Mars through a telescope at the turn of the last century. But in this case, the star is named after him. It's a star some 6-ish light years away. It's a star that moves through the heavens across the sky in a one of rapid motion. It's not something you'd see in a day or a year. But they believe now that there are these 4 exoplanets around there. And once again, many speculate that life in the universe, if it's anything like us, organic life, may abound around these red dwarf stars. So here we go, another possibility by 4 that maybe these could be, or there could be, at least one of those, or all of them, some sort of organic material there for some sort of life as we know it.
Steve, obviously yesterday was tax day. I think people may get an extra day or two. I remember the very funny moment in the movie Apollo 13 where President Nixon grants the Apollo 13 astronauts an extension on their taxes. But what are astronauts supposed to do if they're at the International Space Station or somewhere else, not on the planet, in terms of getting their taxes filed? I can't imagine the government just forgets about them. So what do they do?
It's one of the best questions I've ever heard, and an answer always honest. I'm not sure, but I think the simple thing, just like anybody on the ground with, concerned about this day now passing, you file for an extension, and maybe that's what they do. They do have internet, and maybe that's what they might have to do. I don't think there's any exemptions because everybody should be treated the same. So I think that's probably what I would do if I was up there and said, oh, I didn't realize that April 15th is coming that quick. But again, their salaries are not that great either. I mean, if you look at the average salary of an astronaut, it must be by dedication. It's barely $100,000 a year, maybe upwards of $135,000. So I would imagine they're not doing it for the money, but I would file an extension.
Wow. Well, Steve Kates, it is always a treat to talk with you. We'll be listening to you this weekend. Hope folks check you out. If they want to listen, they can go to WABCRadio.com. We'll do it again in 2 weeks, Steve.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
In the words of the great Casey Kasem, keep your feet on the ground and keep reaching for the stars.